Preseason game number 1 is on its way against the Detroit Lions. We take a look at the key players on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, and also the 53-man roster at large. Who needs to stake their claim to be a part of the Big Blue? Yes, my friend, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast, joined, as always, by the season ticket holder, generational talent, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
Adam, I'm feeling really good. A question, is this the official start of football now that the Giants play a game, or is it actually week 1 of the regular season? Like, when do you really start feeling like football's back?
Yeah, I know it's weird, right? Because when the draft happens, I'm like, oh, that's the baby. Like, football's back, even though that's, seconds after the season has ended, it feels like in a lot of ways. Training camp makes it interesting, but now the preseason's in some ways been devalued. There's player value in trying to figure out who's going to make the roster. I don't know. Maybe it's the start of the new season. I think until I see snap 1 week 1, that's my official kickoff of the new year.
Yeah, it feels like until the starters are playing more than maybe like a couple of reps here and there, it still feels like it's a tune-up. Maybe it's the appetizer to the entree. That's the way I like to think about it.
There we go. Yeah, I'm having a house salad. I'm thinking about the vinaigrette, and I'm waiting. I'm tantalizing myself over that steak and hoping it's charred perfectly on both sides. Now, when we talk about the Detroit Lions matchup and the first preseason game on Friday night, there's 3 things to look at here, right? Players that matter in terms of evaluating guys we know we're going to be a part of this roster, first on offense, then on defense, and also the roster at large here. So let's just talk about guys that we know kind of when it comes to preseason games, we're not going to see, 60 reps from Daniel Jones, but who are a couple of the high-level players that for however long they're out there, you're interested in just seeing them look crisp, clean, and maybe make a couple of nice plays.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we talk about the offensive side of the ball, I think there's a couple of names that stick out to me. They may be different than what you're thinking about, but I'd like to see Jalen Hyatt right out of the gate. Obviously, young, talented rookie. I want to see that speed and all of the work that he's done in training camp and come to fruition. I want to see him at least catch one of those balls that you're like, wow, that we're glad to have this guy. So, like from an offensive skill perspective, obviously seeing him out there is going to be important. Do you have another skill guy that you're thinking about on offense?
Yeah, you know what? I'll go something a little bit less sexy. I'm gonna go with Paris Campbell, I think, just because we haven't seen, like, I was almost gonna say Isaiah Hodgins just to see him take the next step now this year. But Paris Campbell's new guy. I want to just see that he looks fluid out there, even though he's had some plays in camp. It's been Darren Waller has been the absolute star and stud of the offensive side of the ball, right? Jalen Hyatt's getting everybody excited. I think I just want to see like that Paris Campbell has that veteran experience of, route combinations, where I need to be, catching balls, make a couple little plays, and then getting off the field healthy.
Yeah, I like that pick. Obviously, we don't know how many snaps any of these players are going to play. I don't know if we're
one good snap. That's
that was one good snap. Give Paris Campbell like a reverse play where he can get out of bounds and he doesn't get hurt, but he looks like he knows how to run the route tree. Great, wonderful. I think outside of some of the skill positions, what I think is really going to be interesting is how the Giants deal with both of the different guard positions in this game, because we've seen Ben Bredesen play not only center, but left guard and right guard. We've seen Joshua Zudu play inside at guard. We obviously know, Joe Shane's first free agent signing was Mark Glowinski, who plays right guard. Kind of had an up and down year last year. I'm curious to see how they rotate around the guard position, because it feels like there's kind of 3 guards for 2 spots. And I'm wondering if any of them are really up for grabs over the first couple of preseason games.
Yeah, I mean, offensive line obviously is always critical. We know with Evan Neal being in the concussion protocol and having that opening at tackle as well. I think you're right. Like, and again, when I think when you say it too, it's we know over the rest of the preseason, right? So this is step 1 at the guard positions. How is it going to look? Do we see that there's a refining process as we work our way through the rest of August to say, Bredesen has cemented himself here. Glowinski is still earning that right guard obviously, and we feel confident in them, I think, is more than anything, because we did see they had Bredesen going over to right guard, as you mentioned. And that, see, to me, it feels like the goal for the Giants was to have Bredesen be now the swing guard, and the backup center. Like, he's the interior backup for everything. But it still requires a guy like Ezeudu or someone to step up in some way here. And so far in camp, by the way, maybe Shane Lemieux becomes a guy to watch, because he ain't look good, and he didn't look good in the joint practices. And that does create like a potential depth hole here for the Giants, depending on how Ezeudu looks and the way to go.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because it was something I was going to pose a question to you about. So you and me are on the same wavelength here, and it's the idea of Ben Bredesen might be. He's obviously had more experience than someone like Joshua Ezeudu, but his versatility across the offensive line helps because he can fill in a variety of ways. And Adam, the way I think about it is, let's say Ben Bredesen is just marginally better than Joshua Ezeudu, right? But for whatever reason, Ezeudu's coming off a big, serious neck injury that he had in 2022. The problem is, let's just say someone goes down with an injury, you end up having to shuffle the line a couple of different places. Like, let's say John Michael Schmitz goes down with, hurts his hand or something. All of a sudden, you're now moving Ben Bredesen in, and you're bringing someone else in. So you're actually shifting up two pieces of the offensive line. Is there a world where like Ty goes to Ezeudu because of Ben Bredesen's utility across the offensive line? Like, I think that's something to think about, and you can tell that the Giants are already thinking about it by the way Ben Bredesen has practiced at all the positions.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, right? To your point, as long as it's not, we're going to start Ezeudu, and boy, is it going to be ugly, right? But Bredesen can play all the backup spots, so we don't want to waste him there. No, but as long as they're close enough, as long as Ezeudu is showing that he's capable of playing consistent reps, then you just have this safety valve, right? And by the way, if Bredesen, a veteran with experience, starts as the backup, and then listen, 2 weeks into the season, we say, well, unfortunately, Ezeudu, like, it doesn't look like you're going to get there, right? Shane Lemieux coming back from injury last year was a good example of this, right? Try to get him in there for some reps, and you go, oh, okay, that's not going to be the answer, right? You can always switch and then say, okay, Bredesen, you are now the star guard, and if we need to go out to the market and pick up a true backup that we feel comfortable with, so be it, right? So that's the way I would approach it, at least at that position. We'll circle back around to offense. I want to make sure that we get over the defensive side here too. And then when we talk about 53-man roster, I think it's going to be guys on both sides that we look at saying they're going to get some reps here, especially early preseason when we don't expect a lot of starters to be in there for very long. Defensively, you know what? It's funny. I'll go the first one I'm going to go with, because I was trying to think about this in real time, and it actually got pretty easy. It's Darrian Beavers, right? Because injured last year, he's coming in. He's a plug-and-play starter next to a Karake, who I also want to see. But I want to see Darrian Beavers some live snaps for 4 or 5, and then get off the field. But just at the high level, if I'm going starters first, he's the guy I'm just excited to see out there. And all these things, I'll reiterate, it's not even about analyzing analyzing the plays and everything. It's just, these are guys that I'm excited to be on, quote unquote, live football action for the New York Football Giants.
Yeah, question for you around Beavers. Do you expect him to play a lot of snaps, knowing that he got hurt
No.
in the preseason last year? Like, you almost want to, like, do you just want to see him for like a series and then get out, or do you even want to see him like at all at this point? I'm curious what the expectations are for how much you want him to play.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like the excitement. It's like it's the symbolic gesture of like, hey, you're back, you're healthy. We know you're going to be the starter. And I guess, you know what, you probably bring up the point that maybe takes away him getting on the field potentially, because it's like, we know you're the starter, like, and we know we want you to be healthy through preseason. So maybe there's like a very, very high threshold for a reason that he would step onto the field. And if so, then I would say that linebacking room just becomes really fun to watch when it comes to Micah McFadden, who said he's learning the system better. And we mentioned last episode, a guy like Carter Coughlin, who's in the mix here. And we'll talk about maybe when it comes to 53-man bubbles and rumors about other guys that the Giants have been bringing in for visits. But the backup linebacking room when it comes to preseason, I think is going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, the linebacker position is going to be interesting. There's also guys like Cam Brown that we're talking about. Micah McFadden feels like if Beavers isn't going to go, he's been the guy that the team seems to be pretty high on. So there's going to be a little bit of a battle there. I think you'll probably see those guys get a few more reps, so you might be able to see more about what they have. For me, Adam, I think a lot of people are going to be curious about it. I thought everyone's going to say Deonte Banks because he's our
That's what
first
it
round
is. Yeah,
pick,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you want to make sure that he's playing well. But for me, it's actually not Deonte Banks. It's going to be the three-headed monster of Zion Gilbert, Darren Evans, and Rodarius Williams, who are listed as third-string cornerbacks on this team right now. And the
Mhm.
reason why is they're all undrafted, late round, been around for a year or two kind of guys, and this is really make or break time for them. These are the types of
Mhm.
preseason games where these third-string cornerbacks have the ability to get a lot of game time reps. They're going to be playing
Yeah.
2 quarters, 3 quarters, maybe even the full game. And this is important because I think you and I both agree that I don't know if there's a way that Darnay Holmes makes it to the 53-man roster, given the cap implications and everything else we've seen in camp so far. So because of that, we already know guys like Deonte Banks are going to be here. We know that Adoree Jackson's going to be here. Who's that guy that's the undrafted free agent or the late round pick that can really push to say, I can give you 90% of what Darnay Holmes is giving you at a fraction of the cost?
Whatever percentage that whatever player is giving you of Darnay Holmes, I hope it's not the same type of percentage, right? Like, not every percentage is graded equally. 90% of what's very disappointing is not going to be a lot of fun to watch.
But
But I know what
but
you mean.
seven
It's just
but you're making 700 grand as opposed to 3 million.
right,
If you're giving me
right,
90%
right.
Darnay Holmes, then give me that. I'll take the 2.5 million in that too, you know?
And especially if you're looking about maybe making a move, right? Anthony Barr was talked about, just to give you a name that's been discussed around the linebacker room of Darrian, obviously, and other names on the defensive front as well. If you're just looking to free up some cap space and it's about 90% of the return on investment, 100%. It's funny. I will just say Deonte Banks, I think it's interesting with the emergence of, so this was so funny, right? Normally, if Trey Hawkins was a first, second, or even third round pick and is playing in camp and looks like he's taken on maybe a starting role and a real contributor for this defense, you would say, we won't see him out there a lot. But he's a later round pick. So I'm very curious about whether or not they still say, well, you're doing a great job in camp, but you need to keep developing. Deonte Banks, if you weren't a high draft pick, you'd be out there getting maximum reps because you haven't looked so, but you're a rookie and we want to see you develop. So the secondary overall is fun to watch in that regard. And I'll even put Cordell Flott in there. Like, I think all of these guys are going to be exciting to watch because I think for different reasons outside of Adoree Jackson, every one of them, you can make a very strong case. Hey, we'd like to see some live game reps on them, right? To whatever degree, for whatever you're trying to accomplish back into the roster or otherwise, these guys need to put something on tape.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's the whole point is like you could look good in training camp, you could look good in some of these mixed practices, but there's just no getting around live game tape against another team, especially against other guys that are trying to make their roster. They're going to be playing as hard as they possibly can. And so you're going to see some of these really good matchups, albeit you're going to see it against second and third string. So you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But yeah,
Yeah.
Adam, I mean, listen, there's, we talked about getting back to the offensive side of the ball. The other small thing that I was going to say is, I'm curious about how the backup running back position is going to look and
Mm-hmm.
who's going to be able to get reps. Like, look, we know Saquon Barkley is there, the superstar running back for the Giants, all pro capabilities at any given moment. We think Matt Breida is the number 2 because the Giants are putting him in the second slot for the depth chart. But Adam, then you go into a lot of guys that you could kind of flip a coin and say Eric Gray was our a draft pick of this season. Gary Brightwell's the be all end all special teamer. James Robinson is kind of the veteran who was signed as insurance against Saquon Barkley, and Jay Corbin, who the Giants picked up last season. I believe he was undrafted and has kind of been
Yeah.
sitting around on the practice squad. But you and I both like it. Feels like those guys are going to get quite a few reps. Are you more excited to see someone like Eric Gray be out there? Are you hoping to see Jay Corbin get more reps? What are you looking at from the running back room?
Yeah, I don't think so. And Gary Brightwell dealing with a little bit of an injury, but he's been a special teams player as well. He started to establish himself last year. So if you look in the running, to occupy one of those spots, I think he's pretty safe too. What becomes interesting to me is I think ultimately, if we also think about 53-man roster here, right, in the big picture, Saquon Barkley, Matt Breida, Eric Gray, Gary Brightwell. Those are the guys that I think they go into the season with. Now, you can make a case that 4 is too many to have at the running back room or how it's going to work out with the practice squad potentially. Corbin maybe back to the practice squad. I think Robinson lands somewhere else if he's playing well, right, to your point. That was the insurance policy in case things went absolutely belly up with Saquon. My interesting thing is Eric Gray claiming the backup role, right? Is he coming in and showing like I can be the primary backup to Saquon because I can do the north and south running. We've heard Dable talk about him. Matt Breida is more the pass catching backup in that regard. So these guys are going to work in tandem behind Saquon, but I think this would be a new wrinkle for the New York Giants offense if they had a running back like Eric Gray come in and establish I can be a high-level backup. Usually it's okay if we need someone to sell Barkley for a rep or two. Remember, the Giants are using Saquon a lot in camp pass catching. So there's going to be scenarios where I think they want to have a little bit of a bulldoze going down the middle of the field. Gray could be that.
Okay, so question for you again. I don't know why the running back positions got me excited going into all of this, but
It should.
so Matt Breida was serviceable
Yeah.
in the absence of Saquon Barkley, or when Saquon Barkley needed a rest, but only averaged 4.1 yards a carry. Obviously has a little bit more versatility if they do pass catching, but really didn't catch that many passes last season. He had about 20 catches out of the backfield. Is there a scenario where you don't see Matt Breida on this roster? Like if Matt Breida doesn't win the backup running back spot as the 28-year-old veteran, the Giants can save about $1 million in cap space if they let go of Matt Breida. Is there a scenario where you see the Giants say, we've got Saquon, we've got Gray, and we've got Brightwell for special teams. Let's save the $1 million and the roster spot and look elsewhere?
Yeah, it's interesting because remember, too, he had 7 catches on 8 targets for 12 yards in the final game of the season against Philadelphia. So when we talk about those stat lines from last year, they also get skewed, not from a yardage standpoint, but volume. The targets were there, right? And it's funny. You and I talked about him, I think, going into last season saying, oh, this is a nice guy to have, change of pace, can do these things. But given how small the role turned out to be because of the high usage that Saquon had, I think this does fall into the same category of looking and saying, like a Darnay Holmes, maybe, listen, where's the best value on the roster, right? Where do we need more depth? Where do we need more value? And if you feel confident in Eric Gray, if you think that even a guy like Corbin could get called up from the practice squad if you needed during the season, right? And Gary Brightwell is going to be there. And by the way, Gary Brightwell looked good last year in some of his opportunities inside of the offense beyond special teams. If those guys look good enough, it's the same thing we're talking about in a lot of these other positions. Do I think it's likely that Brett gets cut? Probably not, because it just seems like the team likes him and wants him there. But I would understand the logic of freeing up a roster spot, a little bit of money. Now we're talking what? Darnay Holmes doesn't make it. Breida doesn't make it. Almost $4 million in cap space that we go do something with, right?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's one of those things where he's also 28 years old, which is like the decline of the running back, which is overstated. But he doesn't have as much tread on. He hasn't used as much tread on his tires as other people because he's usually been a situational guy. Keep in mind, he only had 54 carries for the Giants over the last 2 seasons with the Dolphins and Bills. Had about 80, 85 carries in total. Some of these bell cow running backs are getting 200 carries over the course of the season. So I'm not necessarily worried, but it is something, he had his lowest yards per carry of his entire career last season. And some people may say, well, that's the offensive line. But then you look at Saquon Barkley and you say, well, he still got over 1,000 yards. So how do you really distinguish that? But there are some veteran starters for the Giants where you say, if you really don't solidify this backup position or like a serviceable position, we have to go with one of these younger guys, undrafted guys, for the upside, cap space, and roster spot.
100%. Let's close out on this thought because I mentioned Chris Campbell there earlier, and we didn't even get to Darren Waller. I think it'll be fun to watch Daniel Bellinger for sure. By the way, Lawrence Cager, I said this last year. I said it again at the start of this offseason. I think that I want to see him play. I believe that he is the exact athletic model of tight end that you want to have side of the direction this offensive system is going. But if we think about it, and that there's a whole host of the 6 tight ends that we, right now currently on this roster, but that'll get cut down. But when you look at that wide receiver room, Isaiah Hodgins, Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, supposed to be coming off the PUP list soon. That makes 6. Cole Beasley is 7. I'll be honest with you, actually. Realistically, I want to see what Cole Beasley looks like if he's going to be playing because he's 34 years old. And if there's a world that he occupies a spot, you better look like a crisp, spry, quote unquote, 34-year-old wide receiver. I really do not want him to make the roster. And that's mostly predicated on the other guys that fit that mold that I want to be there. But remember, names like David Sills, Jamison Crowder, Bryce Ford Wheaton, Colin Johnson, and Khalil Pimpleton, my little humble favorite, who seems to be absolutely outstocked here at that skill set. What do you think is likely? Because real quick, Patricia Traina of SI and of Locked On Giants she brought up the idea of like, don't be surprised if maybe the Giants trade one of that second group of wide receivers because they have value. Like the Giants have created an enormous amount of value, even if not true number ones across the board. What is your likely scenario for who's making it and guys that aren't making it and maybe become actually a valuable asset?
Yeah. So this, I feel like the Joe Shane has done a great job with insurance policies, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know it sounds strange, but it's like, why did James Robinson get signed? It's the off chance that Saquon Barkley sits out. At least we have a running back who has led a team in carries for a season. We don't feel like we're getting caught out. I think Joe Shane did the same thing, knowing that Sterling Shepard and Wan'Dale Robinson, two of his favorite slot receivers, may or may not be healthy for the start of the regular season. So what does he do?
Yeah.
Let's load up on other slot receivers, just as insurance policies. And the way the contracts were structured, I love to always follow the money.
Oh,
That's usually
baby.
a good indication of who's going to be where and when. And when you look at guys like, I don't know, Cole Beasley, he signed for the veteran minimum, 1.165 million, zero dead cap hit if they were to release him tomorrow. So another insurance policy where it's no risk, all reward for the Giants. Another player that looks like that is Jamison Crowder. He signed earlier. He's at 1.3 million with $27,000 in dead cap if they decide to move on from him. Those are two players that
Right.
you say, like, is there anything left in the tank? How are Sterling Shepard and Wan'Dale Robinson getting along? Are they progressing the way that we want them to? Those two, I still can't believe that Cole Beasley just automatically vaults to the top of the depth chart after not being there at all. When you've seen, like, they re-signed Darius Slayton, they drafted Wan'Dale Robinson, they went out and got Jalen Hyatt, like
Darren Waller, even, right? Like, you've gotten another weapon, like.
Right, they re-signed Darius Slayton. Like, you say he's from the old regime. Well, guess what? He's not anymore. You re-signed him. You
Right.
decided you want him still on this roster. So for me, Cole Beasley coming in this late in camp, I can't fathom a world where you're like, you know what, Sterling Shepard, thanks but no thanks. We're gonna go with Cole Beasley. Like, you know how
Yeah.
upset Giant fans would be if they cut Sterling Shepard for Cole Beasley? I think the head would explode. So for me, Adam, I go with the money. I think that, Cole Beasley and Jamison Crowder are the two least likely to be here. I think there's going to be a battle for how many roster spots wide receivers get. Could be 6. Could you fit 7 in? That's going to be the question.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're on the same page when it comes to Cole Beasley as well. And frankly, if we're thinking on that timeline or on that wavelength, I would say Hodgins, Hyatt, Slayton, Campbell, Shepard. That makes 5. If we think that Robinson's going to be healthy, that makes 6. And you know me, man. I look inside of that other room there, and the guys that are on that bubble, like Bryce Ford Wheaton. All eyes on him in the preseason because I'd love to see it look like he's earned the ability to maybe fill out that final spot. Do you produce enough consistent value? Because yes, the Giants have all the quick, shifty guys, and they have established talents on the outside. But you could use more size. And I think Bryce Ford Wheaton has a path because of that. There's not a breadth of depth there behind him.
It does feel like there's maybe a roster spot up for grabs between Bryce Ford Wheaton and Colin Johnson. Obviously, last training camp and preseason, Colin Johnson looked awesome. People were talking about him not only making the roster, but being a key contributor on the offensive side of the ball, Adam, before he got hurt. So now that this is going to be something to watch tonight. And at the end of the day, these are the types of guys that are fringe. Am I going to make the roster? Am I not? This is my opportunity. I need to seize the day. Look out for guys like Bryce Ford Wheaton. Look out for guys like Colin Johnson. One of them is hopefully going to make a big play and kind of vault themselves into, you're not going to leave me off this roster.
You better believe it, man. Timon Fox, O'Shane Ximenez, these are guys on defense that are going to get reps. The defensive front seems weird to look at because there's injuries, and clearly the Giants are going to make a move. So maybe it's early. As we get to preseason games number 2 and 3, we'll obviously get a better sense of where some of those positions stand, though, too. But that's it, man. Tonight, the first preseason game kicks off. By the way, Daniel Jones has moved into veteran QB territory, where we don't even talk about him for preseason games because it's about being healthy. He's already checking his boxes, and obviously the team came off a much better second shared practice with the Detroit Lions. So we'll go ahead and come back in, break down what we saw from this game, things that we liked, hopefully injury-free football for the New York Football Giants. And until next time, as Andrew Makowitz, after you get us on YouTube and on Twitter and on all social media platforms at One Giant Podcast, at Andy Mac 214 and at Adam Armbrecht, would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.